advertising semaglutide. Maybe they're trading, like Michael said. Maybe they're just hoping someone orders it, and then they figure out a way to get their hands on it or manufacture it. But I think most of them are not legitimate suppliers. Even the 30 who have a DMF, I think most of them are not so serious about it. Yeah, I think so. I think most of them can't be manufacturing high-quality API on any significant scale. Are they selling it? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if anyone's buying it.
Just go with it.
Maybe, or maybe less. I don't know. Yeah, I think a lot of people file a DMF hoping that someone will come and ask them for a larger quantity, but whether they actually have a process that's legitimate is another question.
So Margaret.
Yeah.
Margaret, I can speak a little bit
please,
to that because I actually am in the small molecule side, and I'm not sure exactly how I got into this panel, except I did. Thanks, Margaret.
I know how you did. So does Margaret.
Okay, we won't talk anymore about that. But anyway, I mean, to your point about like, DMFs and so on. So, and I've seen that, I've been in China about 15 years. Before that, I was in the US with Schering-Plough and Merck. Also did a couple of years with some CDMOs. But if you walk around CPH Shanghai, you will see, as your point is, a lot of DMS for a lot of compounds. And I remember one a few years ago, it was a Schering-Plough compound, and I knew that it wasn't off patent yet. So I went over to the guys who were selling and said, well, I noticed you have this compound here, and you have a DMF for it? And I said, oh yeah, we have a DMF for it. I said, well, I'm from Schering-Plough. I know the compound isn't off patent. And then they said, oh, but this is just a practice DMF. Yeah. So you see a lot of that stuff. So you're right, trying to figure out who's real, who's not real. You have to do a little detective work, a little legwork to make sure that you don't get, how should we say, hooked and then bait and switch and all this other stuff. So it's interesting.
Anybody else have an opinion about what's happening there, Tim?
I mean, I'm going to pile on that point just to segue. Fundamentally speaking, at least in the United States market, you can make mountains of any molecule you want before anything's off patent. It doesn't matter. Selling it commercially is the bad move. So you can have a DMF out the yin-yang, hypothetically, and make mountains of it and have it in stock sitting there waiting to pull the trigger, sell it commercially on day one as you wish. We saw that all the time back in 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in India. They would stockpile metric tons ready for day one launch. If we were, first of all, at Sandoz or Teva was whoever, they were ready to service folks day one at midnight when that patent was either knocked out by a paragraph 4 or it expired. So that's very common in Asia. Now, to your point, and I don't think it was actually 30 out of 100 that would be BS. I think it'd be more like 50. I think it'd be 50-50.
I think we said 70 were BS.
Okay. Okay, I thought you said 30 were BS. I'd say more like 50. But yeah, and to your point, exactly that. I saw that very often in Hyderabad, where you'll walk around a CPHI worldwide and you'll see molecules advertised. Yeah, well, India, this was 15 years ago, they were particularly, I hate to say it, bad about it, but they would advertise just to get you hooked, just to get you in the booth, get a conversation, and then as soon as you show interest, boom, they're on the phone saying, hey, get our guys cranking in the lab, we want to make this like right now. And then I'm saying that from the standpoint of a buyer at Sandoz Novartis, Big Pharma, whatever you want to call it, even though Sandoz was generic, it was still Novartis money. So the instant they get interest, oh yeah, they're all about it. But before that, it's nothing more than text on a banner. They don't have anything, oftentimes. But anyway, I don't want to go down that road too far.
I think to your question of who's buying this stuff, there is this really large thing we often don't talk about. This, oh, excuse me, this large research use only community that doesn't have the same standards and stuff like that. That's buying it from any no-name place that's just very price sensitive. That's not interested in quality control, et cetera.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of different things here, right? Because you talk about if you want to get a marker right. So technically speaking, if I'm at Schering-Plough and I want to get, like, say, a drug that's on patent, say at Bristol Myers Squibb, I'm legally allowed, as long as it's only used for R&D purposes, to make it, have somebody make it for us. And it's a gray area, actually, because we had a lot of discussion about this. Do you get someone, like, say, to make it for you and pay him? Does that legally allowable or not? And depending which patent lawyer you talk with, they say, yeah, it's okay, or maybe it's not, because now you've commercialized it to some extent. But technically speaking, there's a provision that allows companies to do the R&D
Yep.
focus on it. And then to Tim's point, I mean, I think a classic case was the Apotex when they did one of the BMS compounds. I think that came off patent. They literally the next day, the sales just went down to the floor essentially. So yeah, you're right. But it's an interesting market out there.
Isabel, what do you think about?
I think, for Chinese peptide company, they have developed, actually now, developed the strong technology to, and like analysis for the generic peptide. From my understanding, I think for peptide, like tetrapeptide and semaglutide, it's not so complex moleculars. Maybe in the market there is more complex structures. For example, like Merck's MK 0616. Yeah. For their peptide, I believe lots of Chinese companies, they have the capability and
Make it cheap.
Because there are lots of strengths for Chinese company. For example, like the energy economics of scale and a larger capacity for the production. Yeah. So. I think the Chinese companies still dominate the GLP-1 API, the market.
Does everybody agree that the Chinese are the dominant factors for the GLP-1s? Yes?
Yep.
Yes. So, I mean, when I was in China in June, Biocon actually came out with a newswire that said, we are not going to approach the China market with our GLP-1 finished dosage. And that was really telling because their cost wasn't going to be able to beat the local Chinese manufacturer. And that came out the same time as CPHI, which was interesting. These topics, China, because faster capacity expansion, regulatory, I think the government's very supportive in China for manufacturing. We talked about that, but one thing I wanted to touch, and you guys can jump in, because we're a small group. Everybody's using solid-state synthesis for most people are using the solid-state peptide synthesis, and but Novo uses a fermentation process using yeast, and that's supposed to really lower your cost. So the first wave of manufacturers of the GLP-1s use the solid-state peptide synthesis, where you can't really scale up, you can only scale out by putting, putting 100 of these units to increase capacity. Whereas with fermentation, recombinant, you can just make the fermenters bigger. So are you seeing more companies using recombinant versus to reduce costs versus the solid-state synthesis? I can tell you what I found for you guys.
Well, I would add in also, besides solid state, if the peptide is small enough, you can also do a combination of solution phase plus solid phase. So a lot of companies have done that. I think like companies back like Sanofi and so on, even back in the 2000s, had projects to do that for one of their, I think it was Clairwell, and they came up, it was at AIMER, and they ended up coming up with a solution phase synthesis of it, which made it much more effective than doing a traditional more sustainable than making a solid phase. So it's all out there. It's just another little tool that you can use for manufacture of peptides. But again, it depends on how big it is, how easy it is to break it down into like maybe sections of like maybe a 3-mer or a 4-mer or whatever, and then how do you couple it all together.
One thing I would just add, when I've had the opportunity to talk with employees at Novo, they claim, I don't know how true it is, but that part of their kind of their corporate governance and responsibility, environmental impact, that's why they're using fermentation.
Yeah. And it is supposed to be cheaper.
And at certain scales cheaper, yeah.
And bigger batches, much bigger batches, and but I guess the capital CapEx is a little bit bigger. So we actually see a lot of companies in China claim that they're going to switch over to for the commodities, switch over to the fermentation method from the solid state synthesis method. And as you know, China has a long, also Greater China has a long history of fermentation. I mean, 100 years ago, we were making MSG. We know how to ferment. I guess Europeans know how to countries and in other parts of the world. Any comments on that? MSG?
Okay, so I guess my comment would be like, I view this, because as a process chemist, these are all technologies you can use. And, you know, so for example, fermentation, I wouldn't say is the panacea that's going to cure everything. What I do think, though, is China has certain advantages over other places in the world. You know, you're looking at incredible infrastructure, you're looking at a very mobile, you know, say, worker populace, right? I mean, if Foxconn.com needs 500,000 workers to build, you know, yeah, but they actually have a huge facility in China, and I've read this, you know, and if they need 500,000 workers to go ahead and just, you know, for 3 months, you know, to build a whole bunch of iPhones, they can do that. So same thing in the pharmaceutical business, right? You know, they can bring in like, you know, 5,000 chemists if they want. I mean, Wushi's done that. Porton did it for one of their compounds they did with Pfizer. They just brought in like a couple of thousand guys, and when it was finished, they let them go. So it's a flowable thing. So I think that's China's advantage, not necessarily that they have been doing fermentation for 100 years, because that technology is available to anyone. It's just a matter of getting the right skill set of people to do it. It's more about the cost advantage, as you point out, Margaret, and it's all coming down to infrastructure, huge labor supply. And right now there's a lot of skilled engineers in China, for example, chemists are training. You know, China graduates, I think something like maybe 5 to 6 times the number of organic chemists that the U.S. does at the graduate level. So, you know, that's a huge pool.
Does that give it an advantage over India, for example?
India, I think, is really interesting because, you know, I don't know as much about the Indian market as I would say about China, but I think in talking with our Indian compatriots and so on, they're more focused, or they have been more focused on, for example, generics and things of that sort. And you talk with the Indian guys, like, hey, what about biotechs in India? And he said, well, that's really not there. Unlike China. You know, China right now has somewhere on the order of estimated maybe 5,000 biotech companies, you know, which exceeds the number of biotech companies in the U.S., which is estimated around 3,000 to 4,000. The number in India is probably not even 500 or something, but I don't know exactly, but I get that feeling. So it's just a matter of where you want to put your money, right? And then India, you know, following up on one of Tim's point, is they along with Brazil have this rule, okay, that even if your compound is on patent, that doesn't mean it protects you in India. If the government, and Brazil does this too, if they decide it's better in the best interest of the Indian populace to manufacture and sell it to the Indian populace, and without paying royalties to the innovator, they'll do that. And, you know, they adjudicate this in law courses, right? And the last I heard, they've done a number of these cases. I think only one company has actually won. I think that was a Pfizer, but everybody else lost. And so the Indian manufacturers get free reign to make it as a generic, even though it's still on patent.
But how often do they break patent? When's the last time?
Well, I think it's been a while, but no, I don't know exactly, but I know that they have this law that allows them to do this.
Right.
So, you know, if they made it in the best interest, like say if you have a new peptide for cancer, you know, and they say, hey, you know, we think it's in the best interest for the Indian populace, that's what we'll do. You know, and, you know, damn be for the innovator.
Any questions, please?
Yeah, quick question. I know nothing about fermentation, but just when you describe that, so just a few questions cross my mind. So in terms of the knowledge, probably you're ready, but if you look at this from a perspective, you have regulatory concerns. You have if it's from fermentation, it's going to become biologics or synthetic peptide. So just for curiosity. I think I'm loud.
No.
Yeah, I got yours.
Oh, okay. Let me repeat my question. So, from technology perspective, probably you know, China has a very good infrastructures. But I'm more curious about if you switch the technology, right? So how you address from regulatory perspective, and then it's gonna be straightforward. That's good. And then it's gonna become biologics, or it's still like synthetic peptide.
I can answer that.
Okay, thank you.
You know, in Canada.
Thank you.
Okay, in Canada, as you know, semaglutide's going off patent because it is. So they have two pathways. If you have a synthetic product, it's the equivalent of an ANDA. If it's a fermented product, it's a BL. It's a biosimilar. So country by country, in the U.S., you can do either one, as long as the specs. But so it's country by country. Some countries, it depends on the pathway, and you make it, whether it's a biologic or a synthetic product. Some countries like America, it's not. You can still file an ANDA.
Yeah, my concern is when you switch the technology. I think of that. Very quick. So when you switch the technology, definitely the different processes. I think for generic, I think the impurity profile probably is most important thing, and how you address this from synthetic to fermentation. Thank you.
I would actually add in a little qualifier here too. I don't need that. So it depends whether you're using fermentation to actually make the actual drug substance or API, or using it to make an advanced intermediate, which then can be further, say synthesized or processed into the API. And then you might decide different strategies based on that process.
There has been some interesting litigation that Novo Nordisk has taken, arguing that that the synthetic approach was breaking, kind of this exact thing, that was breaking some patents, and that it had to be fermentation.
And that's for semaglutide,
For
or the
semaglutide,
older, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that Canada case of going off patent is, I don't know how many people are familiar with that in the room, but it's really a bizarre story of a $250 filing fee that wasn't filed, and now is going generic next year because of it.
And maybe that's why the president of Novo Nordisk got booted, because he's going to miss a few $1 million of sales.
Yeah, maybe more than that.
Oh, maybe more than a few $1 million. Let's see, what other, you guys, yeah, speak up. And questions? I love to, this is just a very interactive, okay, we can talk a little bit about innovation. I mean, Dr. Ho says there's so many innovative, getting away from GLP-1s, but just innovation in China for new molecular entities.
Yeah, so
has been,
if you look at the data, and I don't know how true it is, but I think it's pretty good because it came from global data and other places. But I think in 2024, China had around a little over 1,000 NCEs, and the U.S. was around 1,400 or thereabouts. So. And that's in China, went from like basically a couple hundred in 2020, and then boom, okay, so, and that's driven by, obviously, by the number of biotechs you have in China, 5,000. Now, this is small molecules, so it could be peptides, there could be peptides. And one thing I think we're not really we're focused here on pharmaceutical applications, right? But there's a huge market also for peptides that are into skincare products.
Yep.
And that's a big thing, so like, I think in China, there's sort of quote unquote 21,000 plus skincare products.
yeah.
And they're all sort of peptide based. So there are a lot of companies have built up to build and meet that market. And it's a pretty big market. It's not huge, but we're talking like maybe 50 million.
Pretty big volume.
Yeah, yeah.
I know a lot of the, some of the Chinese companies I've spoken to, they sell a lot to the Korean cosmetic makers, the high purity peptides for skincare, actually with human studies.
Yeah.
About how it helps enhance your skin. So that's a much quicker road to commercialization.
Yeah, because you don't have to undergo FDA approval and stuff like that. So I
As
know
long as you're not making label claims, you're perfectly
Right.
fine.
So I know from our own experience, because I used to be at China Gateway, and we used to make a compound for Avon.
Yep.
And it was sort of like a peptide in the sense it had amino acid in it. And they used it in their high-end skincare products. But they didn't have to go to the FDA or anything, but apparently it just helped make your skin smoother by treating with it. So it's a big market.
Okay, let's see, what other? The QIOBO report that was issued recently, they were talking about the cost advantages in China versus other parts of the world. Can you talk about, cost advantages? That a lot of Indian companies actually still rely on Chinese suppliers for some of their starting materials.
I can address
Yes,
that
you
right
can
out of the
address
gate.
that.
I have a,
Tim,
how many hours do we have? I was in a position just 3 years ago working for a Chinese manufacturer based in Hubei province. Not FDA inspected, not CGMP, just wanting to fundamentally gain business in the US from Hubei. That was going to be a challenge. I knew that right out of the gate. And I told the guys that when they hired me. I said, well, that won't happen overnight. But what we can do is use your chemistry and your expertise to sell into a different market, if I may. And they asked me where. I said India. The reason I knew that India would be an open market for Chinese raw materials is, again, going back to my Sando days, I knew that many manufacturers for generic API in India were buying raw materials, intermediates, whatnot from India, or from China. So, oddly enough, I'm employed and sitting at my dining room table in North Carolina in the US, selling into India from China 24/7. The reason being, the cost of goods, to your point, for raw materials, generally speaking, not all the time, but generally speaking, the traffic would flow from China into India. If I had to take a stab in the dark guess, 70 to 80% of the time. Now, there were situations where Chinese would buy raw materials from India, but it was definitely the minority versus traffic going the opposite direction. So, just fundamentally speaking, on the surface, I don't have to argue that China has a slight edge on cost of goods, generally speaking, across the board in chemistry as it is. And I think that's not terribly surprising if you think about it, because if you travel the U.S. to go to all sorts of universities throughout the U.S., what you see repeatedly, and I mean repeatedly, if you go to different colleges and look at the life sciences programs, undergraduate and graduate, and you look at engineering, China has made its home in life sciences throughout all of the disciplines of biology, chemistry, molecular biology, biochemistry, whatever it may be. Life sciences is owned by China at the graduate and undergraduate level throughout all the colleges in the United States. Engineering, it's the reverse. India owns mathematics, physics, and engineering throughout all colleges in North America. So it's not surprising at all that if you're talking about life sciences and pharmaceuticals, cost of goods, the Chinese would have an advantage because they're educated, they're innovative, they own that territory, both here and in their homeland. So yeah, I just at a fundamental eyeball approach, it makes perfect sense.
Dr. Miley, do you still teach university?
No, thankfully no.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm done.
Dr. Ho, do you still teach university?
Of course not. But I'll follow up on Tim's point,
Yes,
okay?
please.
Because, and we talked about it, I don't know how many of you were at, was it Tuesdays or Wednesdays? I forget these dates. Anyway, we talked about funding and the global outlook for CMOs and so on. But I think a lot of the reason why China has really got this life science thing going is because of like the Chinese 5-year plans and also the Made in China in 2025 mantra. So they fund a lot of this. So Chinese students, I was told a story, about Barry Sharpless. He said that, why does he take so many Chinese students? Well, because they come fully funded by the Chinese government. I don't have to pay them a dime. So that's how you do it, right? So you send over to the US or to Europe, to the leading schools. They come in, free ride, professor doesn't have to do anything, and then they get educated. Then they go out and get a job, maybe at a big pharma or a small place.
For a few years.
Get 10, 15 years experience. Then they go back to China, and they're basically given an open checkbook about, hey, you want to start a biotech? Here. You want to start a company? Here. Here's like a few million or whatever.
Here's
it
the
is.
land.
Here's the land. Here's the buildings, and they're immaculate and so on. And that's how you build up the.
So they encourage
biotechs.
Innovation
They
in
encourage,
China.
yeah, because, and what drives this, interesting enough, is that, we all know that China has an interesting governmental structure, okay? So I think what drives this is that I've read that by maybe 2030, 2035, the population in China that's going to be over 65 would be something around 400 million people.
A lot of old
And
people.
A lot of old people, and the one thing the Chinese government doesn't want to have happen to them is that, we don't want to have cases where like lots of old people, like tens of millions, dying from curable diseases. So I think that's one of the drivers, for, doing all those stuff, right? Because we have good science now. We can solve a lot of the quote-unquote uncurable diseases. A lot of cancers have been solved. All the other things, the easy targets like, heart disease and so on, now we do like
Diabetes,
top one.
yeah.
We just did diabetes and weight loss at the same time. So you have all this, but that I think is one of the drivers, because if you can then get good drugs out there and make sure that your populace doesn't just die from it, it's great.
I just want to go back to one point.
Oh.
So in regards to generics, I can speak louder, I think. I'll speak louder. Yeah. In regard to generics, right,
they only can follow the ANDA pathway if they use synthetic peptides, right? FDA has been very, very clear about that. Not from a recombinant process, right? I mean, there's clear guidance. They would have to follow the NDA process if they use a recombinant peptide. That wasn't the case some years ago. Then the FDA clearly has clarified that. I just want to make that, pretty clear. So now with China, if China's going back to recombinant, I think then that would be advantages, right, for the innovators, not necessarily for the generic companies. I'd love to hear some thoughts on that. And this causes confusion across multiple fronts. It's like clarification that has to, I guess, be discussed over and over again.
Dr. Ho, you hit it ahead where you said the fermentation part might just be the starting material. So it'd be a semi.
So I'm not a regulatory affairs guy, okay?
Yeah.
So, but I think it's going to be dependent on how good your regulatory affairs folks are and what your actual process is, because it's going to be case by case exactly what you're doing. As I said earlier, if you're doing an intermediate, that's probably not going to be that big of a deal. API directly, that could be the issue. Yeah. And then also where you're going to go, because if you do that recombinant and you're only going to sell it in the China market, then you just have to get approved by the NMPA. Yeah. Then you don't really care about the FDA and the US market or the EMA and the EU market. So I think you have to have a business strategy to decide, okay, where I'm going to sell it. Yeah. So long term, I think people are thinking that at some point in the future, the Chinese pharmaceutical market may become the world's largest. And maybe that's where people focus on. I mean, a lot of Chinese companies, they want to do a licensing deal with like a Merck or whatever it is, or a Pfizer. And we read a lot about that, right? Early stage, phase 1, phase 2, you got great clinical data, and then these guys come in, they buy it relatively inexpensively, and then they bring it out, and then you see what happens. But it's hard to say, I think exactly, because it depends, I think, solely on your business strategy and what you want to do there.
Yeah, and I think the other point you brought up too is actually interesting. If you have a combination process, like a recombinant upstream, you have it's like a intermediate, but then downstream everything is synthetic. Post that gets a little bit gray, right? And that's where a conversation probably with the regulatory agency would be needed to clarify. Could you go down?
What happened about several decades ago with antibiotics? The antibiotic was antibiotic-mediated new application, and then later it became ANDAs. That was how they were trying to do it back. For those of us old enough to remember, antibiotics had a separate pathway depending on how it was manufactured. Yeah. Even though a lot of them were semi-synthetic, they were the ANDAs, but the fermented were AADAs.
Yeah.
Abbreviate antibiotic drug applications.
Yeah. No.
And you could even look at something like Taxol, which went through several generations of how you make it, right? Extracts from particular yew tree, then you had the Bacitin 10 that you could get from the European yew tree, was a lot cheaper, and then you have fermentation processes. So it just depends how you want to do it. But all those sort of involve maybe either, for some of those it was just getting an advanced intermediate, and then you had some sexy chemistry to then make it into Taxol.
Yeah, and just to also throw one more curveball in there. So, for example, it depends, even if you have a synthetic peptide, let's say in Europe, which is another thing, it could be considered a true generic. Actually, Teva is the only one that has a true generic. Actually, I'm the one who filed that. And we were able to classify it as a true generic. All the other four TEOs or teriparatides are considered biosimilars in Europe. Yeah. So, but anyways, there's a lot of caveats, but this does cause some confusion. And, depending on, like, if China moves back to the recombinant, they could then basically carve themselves out of the generic market for the U.S. So that's something for the Chinese manufacturers to consider.
Well, actually in the West, some companies are electing to file two separate applications. One for the synthetic and one for the market's big enough to sustain that.
If they have cash, they can do that, right?
Yeah.
NDAs cost more than ANDAs, right?
BLAs, it would be
BLA,
not NDA. BLAs, you can get away with just 12 subjects in some countries.
Yeah.
So BLA is actually cheaper than ANDA sometimes. So ABLA. Other thoughts about, let's see, starting materials. We talked about, I would like Tim. Everybody probably has gone to CPHI Shanghai over the years. When it first came out many, many years ago, it was a filthy, wet, not very fancy compared to Europe. It was not very fancy. It was small. It was more local. And it was always in June, so it was really hot.
Still is in June.
It's And this past June.
Is that the
I was
Chinese calendar
absolutely
or the
shocked.
American
It was
calendar?
nicer,
Or Gregorian?
cleaner, more high class than the European one. I mean, it's gonna surpass, and they had to divide it into two because it got so big. Part of it was at the Pudong, but the other half was way in the other side of town in Shanghai because it's so big. But I would like Tim to talk about his first time
Oh, yeah.
at the CPHI Shanghai about 10 years ago.
2000, yeah, I think it was exactly 2015.
2015.
The first, and again, this was my first trip to China, in fact, if I'm not mistaken. So I landed.
What was your role?
I was working with a distributor of generic APIs here in the United States. So I was a middleman selling into the generic sector from India and China. And this distributor, based in here in New Jersey, wanted to begin using Chinese vendors, Chinese manufacturers of API. So they said, Tim, you look like you want to go to China. So I said, okay, sure. So I landed at Pudong, go to CPHI Shanghai in 2015. And the very first thing that jumped out at me immediately, because I'm coming back from a Novartis Sandoz background where I'm told by my former CEO at Sandoz, Bernie Hempel, to always wear a tie, no matter the case, at CPHI events. So I'm here in full suit and tie, uncomfortable as heck. It's probably, gosh, it felt like 110 degrees with 400% humidity that day in Shanghai. And I'm walking into the event and I noticed everyone there, practically everyone, were in shorts, jeans, t-shirts, Mickey Mouse t-shirts, and I'm looking like I just don't fit into this at all. I'm like, what in the world am I doing here? So uncomfortable. But it was, oh, I was in full regalia. It was so uncomfortable. So yeah, that was my indoctrination into CPHI Shanghai, how laid back and comfortable you had to be under the conditions. So yeah,
So I
not
have news
at all
for you,
prepared for that.
But Tim, it's actually grown up now. So if you go, like you were there, and you and I were there, in 2025, and now most of the people there actually are business casual. You very rarely see people in shorts and Mickey Mouse, t-shirts nowadays. And the booth have gotten incredibly sophisticated, just on par with what you see at CPHI Frankfurt and so on. They spend a lot of money. Now, I've also told that supposedly this year they had something like 100,000 attendees, at the Shanghai show, which eclipses what goes to CPHI
Yep.
Europe, depending on which venue you go to. So lots of people there.
Lots of Indian companies.
They're, yeah, but mostly I think it was mostly Chinese companies you never heard of. Okay, you walk them down the aisles and you go, who's this guy? I never heard of them, but they're big, and so there's a huge market in China. So let's see.
Let's see what else was on the. Oh, and what I forgot to do is have you guys introduce yourselves. So.
Post-mortem.
Yeah, postmortem. So can you?
I'm John Siegel with JY Medtech. We're a full-service CDMO located in Shenzhen.
My name is Donald Ho. I'm currently a part-time consultant, but my background is process chemistry. I worked around 21 years at Schering Plough and Merck in chemical development, and also spent around 17, 18 years in CDMO land with Rhodiocox Pharma Solutions and also China Gateway. So I live in China now since 2010. So, both sides of the fence, so to speak.
And I'm Tim Miley. I'm with Jiuzhou, work and live in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I used to teach medical students back in the day, I guess to some degree. Taught them all the biochemistry they've long since forgotten as soon as they get their MD and are out the door. I'm a protein biochemist by training. I purified proteins in past lives, so coming back to the whole fermentation thing, the first nightmare that one encounters when you start doing things in bacteria, yeast, or any other organism is that your product, you're going to be up against purification nightmares potentially. So you have to really pick and choose your battles if you're going to use fermentation or not. Oftentimes it's better and easier to go to the solid state or liquid phase, totally synthetic process versus battling Mother Nature and trying to separate proteins from all the milieu of soup that bacteria and yeast can present you when you're trying to purify your final product. So to the point of commercialization and lowering costs of goods, that could be a yes. enzymatically speaking, but you have to separate what you're looking for from Mother Nature's mess that's created in the background. So that's my jaded perspective on that.
Okay, I'm Isabel Tan from Chemspec. Chemspec is a Chinese company specialized in small molecular process development and the large-scale manufacturing. And after publisher in 2023, and then we have the peptide business. And our business team is from Ambiopharm, the top the peptide company worldwide. So we have the strong technology and the large-scale capacity. And because the GLP-1 is a very huge market, so we try to do something just to better service the patients and the unmet marketing need. Yeah.
Any other questions, comments, or? Yes?
I think I'm loud enough.
Okay, you're loud.
I can speak so loud. So I probably I'm going to ask a question from a different angle. I'm not sure if this is just talk about the generic, but I'm more interested in NCE. And then, of course, right now, if Chinese companies kind of dominate the generic peptide, it's been a while already. So how about the NCE? How we look at this? And then, that's first one. Second question is, from our leading companies, for example, like Lockheed, polypeptide, foreign, how can they keep their competitive advantage from your perspective?
Okay. So in the past, actually, I've worked with polypeptide. So they keep, they obviously try and be cutting edge. They have a ton of capabilities and facilities. So I think if you're an innovator and you're looking for someone to help you out with the manufacturing, you're going to do your due diligence. You're going to go and find who you think can meet your cost, timelines, and quality. And oftentimes that could be, one of the big established players. We talked about Bachem, you talked about polypeptide, and there's a bunch in Chinatown, in China, like Wuxi Tides, for example, Chemspec and others. Jiuzhou does peptides too. So I think there's room enough for everybody. But I was asked by actually Dave Harris the other day about like what happens when the GLP-1 market sort of crashes, and you all of a sudden get maybe a small molecule oral dosage form. Then what happens? So my question would actually be back to you, the audience, because peptides can be used for other things than GLP-1, right? You have the peptide drug conjugates. You can use peptides for CNS disorders. So my thinking is that if you build up all this capacity, then you just branch out into other therapeutic areas that just happen to have peptides, and you now have got the infrastructure ready to manufacture them because you've got all this built up thing for GLP type. So Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, but you're building up this huge capacity based on what's a huge market for GLP-1, right? And so sure, there's going to be more peptides for other applications, but is it going to be big enough and soon enough to make up for the investment that you made? Many people, big investments in peptide production. Right?
So
And, so I was an owner of one of these folks. I'd certainly be worried about the market bubble bursting and where am I going to be with my capital investment?
Right. So I think, Dave, as you and I discussed last night, not over beers, by the way, so we were pretty lucid in our discussion. I give you an example would be like the high potency, okay? So 20, 30 years ago, you'd have Lanza and a few other guys that did high potency. And then everybody said, oh, this is a great thing. So Wuxi got in and a lot of people got in. And now, lo and behold, right now there's a lot of compounds coming out that are high potency compounds, or cytotoxic. So it just depends. I think if you build it, and then maybe hopefully the innovators will sort of design and move the market into that place, because now they know, hey, I don't have to worry about waiting 2 years to get my drug into a high potency suite, because now I know there's guys who can do it. So maybe that happens with the peptide area, and I have no idea. And also I think, to my earlier point, it's just not solid phase. It's also maybe some combination of solution phase and solid, depending on the size of the peptide, and then you've got maybe the best solution along with the fermentation approach as well.
If I could join the discussion for a sec. So on some previous discussions, I've heard a lot of voices in the room talk about this impending GLP-1 crash. There was too much capacity being made. I don't see it. I think when I'm meeting with some of these Indian generic makers that want to come out with GLP-1s, they want oral formulations. And if you just look at Ribelsis and you do the math and you look, 7, 14, 21 versus 0.25, 0.5, and 1 milligram, and guess what? You got to take it every day, not once a week. And they want that shelf stable. That's 140x the amount of material. It's 2 orders of magnitude. It's not, and kind of to ask your question about, how Bachem and some of these big players going to kind of stay relevant, like they can't build capacity fast enough. There are also a lot of clients who are coming to us who would love to work with them, but they have to get in line. And not to mention, as Dr. Hose mentioned, there's some very interesting peptides that are in development right now for CNS disorders, Alzheimer's, dementia, that aren't just GLPs, some of them are. I think the market's large. And actually, some of the arguments against kind of or for the crash were like, probably one of the more compelling ones is small molecule, right? Maybe one of those comes out. But so far, that's not working out great. Maybe. But then they're saying, even the ones, if there's not a safety issue, they don't work that well. So it would be a therapy you would take once you get to goal weight. So it's not going to be like it's not going to kill peptides. And then another argument I heard the other day, fen-phen, right? We all know what happened to fen-phen. But that hasn't really happened so far. In fact, like it's been the opposite. It's like there's a lot of discussion, maybe everyone should be on a GLP-1, even if you're really skinny. So we don't really have this fen-phen thing. Then the next thing, this one really blew my mind, Maritide. I don't know if you're familiar with AMG 133, the Amgen program, the once monthly dosing. At first, okay, that's very interesting. So we're going to cut it by 75%, but that product is not that well tolerated. That thing is they don't know what to do with it. It is a very good drug, but it's complicated. I think there's a very strong bullish case for more capacity. I don't see the concern that many others see, but anyways, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's very true. I'm glad you brought it up because the oral versions are going to take a lot more.
Oh my God.
By 10-fold and a couple zeros. And in Taiwan, where I'm from, there's a lot of work on oral GLP-1s, including 3DP.
Mhm.
Companies doing 3D printing using GLP-1s so that you can, in the future, with AI, I think every pharmacy office will have a little 3DP machine and say, okay, you want to look at your statistics, and they'll spit out a script for the week or for the month. And also in Taiwan, they're looking at non-snack oral dosages. So I think there's a lot of technologies going on in that area right now.
And Dr. Hsiao, you really, for me, that is, if there is a big breakthrough in oral technology that allows for great absorption, that would be very bad for all this outlay of, yeah.
I think, kind of quietly,
Yeah.
especially in Taiwan.
So I make a little sidebar because everybody here is focused on GLP-1, you get the weight loss, but there's another drug out there that's well tolerated, been around for years, and it's dirt cheap, metformin.
Yes.
So you do get weight loss with that, and it treats your A1C level, so that can help you if you're sort of pre-diabetic. So for those of you who are in that situation, I highly recommend taking metformin,
Absolutely, I agree. I mean, my
which is
diabetes-
what I do.
Yeah, we take it, take a half a tablet and it keeps you skinny. You don't have to do a GLP-1, you can take metformin and be skinny. So, try to be skinny. I think, also with the oral technologies will, I think, take up the slack of any crash of the big GLP-1 peptides, at least medium term.
Right. So, and I think also in terms of just building up capacity, right? There was like maybe look at like 4 or 5 years ago when Keytruda first came out from Merck, they couldn't find enough people in the world to make it, and they solved their supply chain issue because people said, hey, I can do this now, right? So whatever the next big drug is, people will go in to build it, and then whatever's left over, they'll use it for other things as people fill in the space.
Any other last thoughts, panelists?
Want to join this conversation. I think for the capacity, of course, we have different thoughts about capacity. So, but I want to remind there's one reality is going to happen very soon is when Novo and Eli Lilly, their API plants up running,
Yeah.
they're going to take a lot of their API I don't think, especially peptide API, is not really like comparable for small molecule, the infrastructure over there, but it's still very, very costly. That's why they decided to build their own manufacturing plant. And how you get this? Number one is this is one fact from my mind, and the other one is, of course, the small molecule. Like small molecule can, achieve their acceptable efficacy, and they will get approved by convenience and patient adherence. I feel like they will take up some shares. And then right now, not just the Chinese company, a lot of company. We talk about India company, but if you look at it, also a lot of European companies, they are building up peptide manufacturing capacity. How you look at this?
It's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
agree.
surrounded by many of those manufacturing sites in RTP in North Carolina, Novo being one of them. It is enormous. They built it on land behind where I used to work at Bayer. It's several hundred acres and it's for one peptide. And it's just unfathomable the scale they must have in that facility there in Clayton, North Carolina. And that's just one manufacturer. Eli Lilly, Roche, Genentech, Amgen, they're all building manufacturing. And Lilly partnering with Diasynth, they're all building multi-billion-dollar facilities throughout Wake County and Johnston County, North Carolina. So to your point, I think they're going to yank the rug back internally pretty hard within the next 1 to 3 years. So there will be some suffering for sure on the CDMO front. Yeah. But the market always, it's a pendulum. It always settles to central tendency. So there will be some pain initially, but then it swings back and then eventually it settles. But it's not going to be overnight. Yeah.
And from my standpoint, as a manufacturer with a larger scale capacity for the peptides, I think for the GLP-1, the lifetime is still maybe have 10 years, and in future maybe like oligonucleotides, and the manufacturing seems like with the peptide manufacturing. So yeah, we should have more capacity to for the future, yeah, for other like oligonucleotides, the manufacturing. Yeah, like solid phase.
And I think, the other interesting thing to me, because I come from the small molecule side, so whenever you have a large-scale manufacturing plant, oftentimes it's easy to commission it or repurpose it for other drugs. And I don't know that much about peptide manufacturing, but I'm thinking that you could probably repurpose it to other peptide-like things fairly easily. If it was designed for GLP-1, then maybe it could be redesigned for something else. And then if you could do it that way without a huge investment, then you can just do other things with that manufacturing, or the CDMOs can do other things with their manufacturing facilities.